showing you the process that I use to make sourdough einkorn bread. And this process is adapted from the way I learned to make sourdough einkorn so that it is easier to do and fits into a busy life. So if you want more of this content, be sure to like and also subscribe so that you'll be able to know when the next step comes out. I'm Susan Gluten, a root cause dietitian, which means that when people come to me with health problems, I try to find the root cause so that as they get better, it doesn't just come right back. And quite often, the root cause has something to do with their gastrointestinal health. You would not believe how good for you true sourdough bread is for your microbiome or your gut health. It does have to be true sourdough bread, not what is often sold commercially in the stores with some yeast in it and all this other stuff and then a little bit of sourdough, but true sourdough bread. So the last step that we talked about was feeding the starter, which I have been doing. And usually my next step after I get the starter all the way to a jar full is to pour a little bit of the starter in another jar, which I will do, and then start making my bread. However, I was going to do that today, but things just didn't line up correctly in order for me to be able to film a step I would need to do later on. So I decided to show you an extra step that you can do. I don't usually do this step, although it does break down the gluten in the einkorn even more. But this is something that you can do if you happen to find yourself in the same situation. So what I'll do, I'm going to pour some of this starter into a new jar. So that's going to be the next batch of bread. And then the rest of the starter, which is almost a quart, I am pouring into the bowl that I will be making the bread in. Now, this starter was fed rye flour to make it more economical, but you can use straight einkorn and don't use the rye if you want. So now I'm going to switch to einkorn because now we're starting the step of like kind of adding more to the bread, and it won't be fermenting or sourdoughing as long as before. So anyway, but first of all, I know there's just bean in there. The starter that I poured into the jar, it needs to be fed. So I'm going, and it was just the same way we did before, a little bit of starter, like maybe half a cup. So I'll put in maybe a couple of tablespoons of einkorn or rye. And then I'm going to put in a little bit of filtered water. So this water, even though it is coming from our sink, is filtered because we have a whole house filter. And I'll stir that in, and I want it to be just about pancake batter consistency, and it needs a little bit more flour. So my flour is in a plastic bag because I do grind my own grain, but you don't have to grind your own grain. It does have more nutrients if you do, but I started out, and for quite a few years, I did not grind my grain. I bought it already ground because I wanted to make sure I was going to keep up with this bread making thing before I actually bought a grinder. So I put the starter in there. We're going to sprinkle it with a little bit of flour to feed it in case I forget about it for a few days, and it will go in the refrigerator. So now, what I usually do at this point is start adding einkorn flour and stir it up. And I actually forgot my spatula, so I'm going to see. This is our outdoor kitchen. There is something that I can use. So I'll use this metal spoon, which is not ideal, but it will be fine for this step. Usually I use like a rubber spatula or something. So normally I'll just be adding some flour, a little bit more flour, and I will show you that step tomorrow or the next day. But that's the beauty of sourdough. I can't fit it in today. So I can do a little bit of the process. Once I'm done, store it in the fridge, and then the flour that's in here gets even longer to sourdough or ferment, and that breaks down the gluten in the einkorn or the rye or whatever grain that you're using even more. Now this jar that had the starter in it, I will be using some of this water, and I don't like to waste things, so I just take the water and try to keep it kind of minimal what I put in here, because I won't be adding very much water from here on out. And so I'm just trying to get every last little bit of starter that I started with in here. So this is going to be the water that I add from here on out. Now usually I would be putting some salt in here, about a tablespoon. We'll do that tomorrow. Also some vitamin C, ascorbic acid or something like that to preserve it if your bread won't be eaten very, very soon. Very soon as in within a few days or so, or if you think it might mold for some reason, and maybe even some collagen. But I won't today because I'm not ready to start the bread making process. We're just doing this extra step. So let me get my hands dry, because I don't want to get the spoon wet and then get the flour all wet. So what I'm going to do then is, so I have like almost a quarter starter in here, which means I can add quite a bit of flour. And at this point, I probably, usually I was making it pancake batter consistency, but I'm not going to add that much water this time, because if I get too much water in there, then I'll just have to keep adding flour, and then I might have more than will fit in a bowl, or that would be one loaf of bread. So by the way, the bread that I'll be making is made in a Dutch oven, so it's going to be one of those kind of round looking loaves that you see. Okay, so I've got it mixed in. This is thicker than pancake. That'd be some really thick pancakes. You could probably make pancakes with that, but it's a little thick. Now I still need to add a little bit of water just to make the starter happy, and so I'm just going to put in a little bit. That might have been a tablespoon or so. Stir that in, and let's just see how that is. And this is all just called feeding the starter. So basically what I'm doing is feeding the starter in a larger container than the quart glass jar. So some people don't even use a glass jar at all for their starter. They just start it off in a bowl, and that is totally fine. You just want to be able to, in the process or in between times, have room in your refrigerator for, whatever size container you have the starter in. So today I do happen to have room in my refrigerator for this big old bowl. That doesn't always happen. Okay, so this is kind of medium thick pancake batter, probably about right. I would love to have had my spatula, but I don't have it, and so that's fine. It did great. So normally at this step I would be leaving. This would be kind of in the morning, or maybe late at night, and then the next day I would be doing the rest of the process. But most people do it like in the morning, and then it would be need to be a day when you could get to it often. to feed it. So, but I can't. So what I'm going to do is feed it just a little bit, sprinkle some on top, so it doesn't get hungry. So just a little bit on top, so it's a larger area of the top I'm doing. And then I'm going to cover it with a plastic and put it in the refrigerator. I could, if I wanted today, feed it a little bit more, because when you feed and leave it on the counter so that it gets all bubbly, like once I cover it, leave it on the counter, when it's warmer, like room temperature, everything's going to happen faster than in the refrigerator. And then you can see what's happening and what it's doing. It'll get like all bubbly and happy because it's eating. But I don't trust myself to come back to this today. So I'm going to cover it and put it in the refrigerator. So I wanted to show you one trick that I do. Got to take my rings off because it involves oil. When I cover this with plastic wrap, and I do find it really handy to use the big plastic wrap that you can get from like Costco or Sam's, so it fits over the bowl easily. So something that you will be glad that you did if you needed to do it was put some oil on the plastic wrap before you cover the bowl. So I'm using up some avocado oil. So I used to use this stuff for like high heat cooking until I finally had to come to reckoning with the fact that avocado oil really is a seed oil, so maybe we shouldn't be consuming it. So I'm using it up on the bread. So the reason I'm doing that and I'm covering it with the oil side down is because if your sourdough gets so nice and happy when it's fuller, and it's like the last step, and you it's pretty full bowl, and then you have it sitting overnight, and then you come in the morning and it's just like puffed up on the bowl. Well, when you peel off this plastic wrap with no oil, it's all stuck on there, and you just lost a lot of your sourdough that you worked so hard to make. But if you oil it, no big deal. It doesn't stick to it. So that's it for today. This is going in the fridge, and it's actually going to have to sit for 2 days so that when I do the next step, now I might actually feed it one more time, but when I do the last step of actually forming the loaf, I want to be able to bake it the following day. So this is where there is some timing. You know, you got to have things timed a little bit right. Like, when am I going to have time to be home for the bread to rise a little bit and to bake all in the same day? So you're thinking like perhaps 3 to 4 hours, depending on how hot or cold it is in your area or your house. So you kind of have to time it out that way. So I've decided that I'm going to bake this Friday morning, which means Thursday night or afternoon, some point Thursday, I'll be showing you the next step in, or the last step in forming the loaf. So between now and then, I might feed it, I may not. But it will be sitting in the fridge if I'm not feeding it.